And Lord, I pray you'd bless our time. I pray that we would be stirred up and encouraged to stand bold for Jesus Christ, to share him with others, and to love you with all of our heart, soul, mind, and strength. And I ask this now in Jesus' name. Amen. I want to invite Jennifer and Brian Lee to come up, and we're going to actually take our sermon time to talk about what the Lord is doing in our lives. But I want to kind of share how this all happened. You'll look in your bulletin, and it'll say sermon 3 spirits. So when Sandy was putting together the bulletin for this week, I was already working on my sermon for 1 Corinthians chapter 2 about 3 spirits, not knowing that Wednesday night I would be scrapping that and inviting Jen and Brian to come. I've been meeting, as I mentioned, with Matthew and Leah for marriage counseling, and we were at the Eden Prairie Jerry's grocery store sitting down and talking about the love of Christ in marriage and how Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane before he's arrested. In John chapter 17, verse 3, it says, "And this is eternal life, that they would know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent." And then in Philippians 3:10, Paul, the apostle, writes, "I want to know Christ and the power of his resurrection." And so in the context of marriage, we were talking about how we could grow closer to Christ. And as the husband is following Jesus and the wife is following Jesus, together they're growing closer together. And as I was sharing that, I looked over and I was talking about the importance of Christian friends and fellowship and coming to church. And I turned around and Brian and Jennifer Lee were there, and I haven't seen them in quite a while. And they sat down and then proceeded for an hour to minister to Matthew and Leah and to me about the power of Jesus in marriage and to share testimonies. And as a matter of fact, about 9 years ago when I was on the Pastor Study radio show, Brian was a guest on our radio show, and so
So was she.
and so was Jen. It was so long ago, I don't even remember.
That's okay.
But anyway, I just wanted to introduce them and welcome them.
Yeah.
And it's Brian's birthday today. I didn't realize that either.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, dear.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Brian. Happy birthday to you.
Yeah. Thank you.
13 years ago on Brian's 40th birthday, Jen gave Brian a phenomenal gift. Have you ever heard the name Stanley Tam? Be surprised if you've heard of Stanley Tam. Brian, and put the microphone up so they can hear you. Who is Stanley Tam?
Stanley Tam is a mentor of mine, and he's a business guy, just a regular guy like the rest of us. But Stanley Tam, early in his life, came to know the Lord and wanted to make the Lord basically the center of his life, to the point that he actually, when he got into business, went through the process of making his business legally owned by God. And I was very curious about this, and this was a long time ago, but he started a company called United States Plastics. It's a real company. You can Google it. You can look it up. It's in Lima, Ohio. Today they do plastics, and what makes that company unique is that again, Stanley made God the legal owner of the business, and so a person says, well, what does that look like? Well, first of all, if you pull up into the parking lot of this manufacturing, I call it a manufacturing company, what you'll see on the outside is a cross about as tall as as your church. On the outside of this is a business, okay? It's a company, and a big cross, and it says, "Christ is the answer."
And the really cool part is it's right next to the interstate, so everybody sees it as they drive by.
So Christ is the answer. So you drive up to this business, you see a large cross, and it
Yes.
says Christ is the answer.
Yes. Not only that, okay. So he, and again, he went through this process. It's kind of it takes a while to tell the full story, but he did make God the legal owner of the business. And so, what does that look like? Well, first of all, the profits from the company go to church planting throughout the world. So that's the first thing that does. The second thing is that, it's a form of evangelism, and so every time you place an order, and I would encourage you to do this if you want to, go to their website, United States Plastics Corp., and order something from them, you will get a tract that says, "Do you know Jesus Christ?" It comes with every single order. So I had the privilege of spending a half a day with him. This was before my 40th birthday, because for my 40th, I said I wanted her to meet Stanley Tam, because I was just so blessed to have met this man. And I watched 7 semi-loads of orders go out that day when I was at their plant. And in each one of those had a tract in it saying, "Do you know Jesus Christ?" And there was testimonies. So we're talking about testimonies. So a little pamphlet that had Stanley Tam's testimony along with some, other people that he knows. But so it's just a unique story. I've met some very, I've been privileged meeting some business people, Adolf Kors, for example, somebody that I've met, and there are just many others. Piper, Harry Piper, I think I've told you about him. So there's just many people that I've met in business, but I've never met a businessman that would do something so bold as to make God the legal owner of the business. And so I went, and I was actually skeptical at first. I'm like, can this really be real? And so I went out there, and he took time to meet with me, which, by the way, today, I called 2 weeks ago just to see it, and so I'm assuming he's still living. Today is Stanley Tam's 104th birthday. So he's 104 years old.
So I think that's a powerful testimony. Somebody that puts God first, puts
Yes.
Jesus first in their life.
Exactly.
Let me shift gears a little bit.
Yes, please.
So we were talking on Wednesday night about a miracle that happened, Jen, that you had happen with a blood clot in your leg. Will you share that story with everybody?
Actually, I want to dovetail on Brian's story. One of the cool things about Stanley Tam, he actually was diagnosed with terminal cancer. I believe it was liver cancer.
Yeah, about 60 years ago.
About 60 years ago. So he was told he had like months to live. You're terminal, you're done. Well, he had some people pray over him, and when he went in for surgery, they couldn't find any cancer. It was gone. He was miraculously healed. And the doctors were confounded, and that was, how many years ago?
I think it was about 60 years ago.
So for him to be
104
104 is just a crazy miracle right there, because he was like death sentence. They're like, there's no hope, and God just healed him like that. It's crazy.
So that was another reason why I wanted to meet him. It was like, is this real? I mean, you were healed of cancer? I mean, you were, and yes, it was.
Well, what's so powerful is the Lord does miracles, and the primary reason is to show He's God and also to encourage us in our faith. So one of the reasons why I wanted the Lees to come this morning is to kind of see and hear these testimonies, and then as you're hearing how God has worked in their life, you can begin to reflect on how the Lord has worked in your life, and maybe even get an idea of how you could share that message with somebody else. But Jen has a powerful testimony of how she had a 3 feet?
I had a 3-foot-long blood clot in my left leg. I don't know, but if I stood up, it basically went from here to below my knee when I was pregnant. And so a 3-foot blood clot is pretty astronomically wild for doctors. I had so many visitors coming to see the person with a 3-foot-long blood clot. But I was on bed rest with a pregnancy. I had a very traumatic pregnancy. It was our first baby. And basically, I got put on bed rest at week 20 because I started having preterm labor at like 16 weeks. I had full-on labor at 20 weeks. And then they had to put me on drugs and bed rest to try and stave off the, going through the labor part. And so at like 30 weeks, I ended up getting a 3-foot-long blood clot, and they can't do anything for blood clots other than putting you on heparin, because if they give you clot busters, it kills the baby. And so they're saying, you're in the hospital, you're not going anywhere. And while I was there, every time I had a contraction, because I was having like 6 to 8 contractions an hour from like week 16 on. So it was very serious. I was dealing with high-risk pregnancy doctors. So I was having my 68 contractions an hour or more, and they found out that my son was having heart decelerations while I would have a contraction, which means that he was basically getting suffocated every time I had a contraction. So they're like, you're staying in here. So a week later, I actually had HELPS toxemia. Have you guys heard of toxemia when people are pregnant? Well, HELPS toxemia is where your liver fails. And so I had spent the night vomiting and couldn't stop. I thought I had food poisoning. So I was in the hospital and I was throwing up the whole night. They were giving me medications trying to stave that off. They came in for a blood draw that morning, and within 25 minutes I had 15 people in my room. I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, your liver's failing, and if we don't do an emergency C-section and take the baby now, you're gonna die. So they had to shut off the heparin and wait 30 minutes. So I went bleed out on the table to take him, and they were hoping that my liver didn't fail in that 30 minutes to have me die and have my child die before the 30 minutes was over. So Brian, fortunately, was called back to the hospital during that 30 minutes.
Yes.
And I was signing a lot of waivers, that kind of stuff. And they left him alone in the hallway and saying, if you could only choose one, who do you choose to save?
Yeah, that was a tough moment. My doctors came to me and said, our job is to save both of them, but if we can only save one of them, which one of them do you want us to save?
I don't think anybody wants to be in that position ever.
That was a tough.
What'd you say?
Well, I used logic. She could always have another one, so I said, save her.
I mean, that's how grave it was. It was like,
But-
they were
Was this
like,
with your first son?
this was my
Yes.
first child.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I haven't heard this. I've heard the second child. Or I think. No, yeah.
the
part of
first
that.
one was the traumatic one. The second one was traumatic too, but not to this level. So I had the baby, but my issue is that blood clot. Okay, I'm 29 years old. The blood clot never resolved because I couldn't get clot busters. So basically, anybody know about blood clots? Raise your hand.
Some nurses.
Nurses? Any nurses around here? All right. Well, to put it in real layman's term, once you get a blood clot, it basically blocks off your vein, and so the blood can't flow one way or another. And so basically your leg will swell, or that area will swell. So basically I would have leg swelling, about 1 to 2 inches of swelling on my left leg all the time. I couldn't stand, because if I did, the blood would just pool in my leg and never get back up through the rest of my body, and I was in a lot of pain. They put me on Coumadin, which is a blood thinner, and my doctor said, you're on blood thinners the rest of your life. You're just screwed. This is your life. And with blood thinners, you have to be within a certain range. If you're in the range, you're going to be fine, but if you're too high, you're going to have a bleed out in the brain or somewhere else, and you're going to die. If it's too low, you're going to throw another clot somewhere, and then you're going to die. So this is my life.
At 29.
At 29. I'm sitting in hematology, which is a blood doctor, with a bunch of gray-haired people, and I'm sitting there with a baby going, oh my gosh. I got put on Social Security disability at 29 because it was determined I was fully disabled because of this. I was a courtside photographer for the Timberwolves at 29. I had to lose my job. I couldn't go back to it because of my disability. That was very humbling for me because my job was my identity, and I was constantly in pain. And their solution was blood thinners, and then I had to wear a compression sock. And the compression sock was 45 pounds of pressure. If you guys know if you guys look at your tires when you pump them up, those are 35 pounds of pressure. I had a 45-pound pressure sock on my leg just to make my leg not swell. And that went on for 8.5 years. And I couldn't go to the grocery store, pick up a bag. I couldn't clean my tub. I couldn't stand in lines. I was just basically in constant pain unless I was either flat or had my leg elevated. And I had to take care of a baby. Good times. Very stressful on our marriage.
Yeah? Oh, yeah.
Very, very stressful. I was not happy. stressed out, depressed, angry at God, angry at a lot of things, just long, drawn out. But then in 2009, and I really didn't have a grid for this, God said, I'm going to heal you. And it was kind of wild because I'm in Vegas, Sin City, because my girlfriend's just having a weekend, girls' weekend. And he goes, I'm gonna heal you. And I heard his voice. And I didn't have an understanding that God actually physically can talk to you, you can hear him. And so I told Brian, and we're like, oh, yeah, right, yeah, this is gonna happen. It was just, I grew up, in church, believing God, that kind of stuff. But, I knew about miracles, but I'm like, that doesn't really happen to people, right? You just hear about it. It happens in like Africa, India. It's awesome, but that doesn't happen to real people. And then I went to Ladies' Day at the Arboretum, Prayer Ventures. I don't know if you guys are familiar with them, but it's a ministry here in the metro. And I went out into the garden, and the lady, Betsy Lee said, "Go out and pray. God's got something to tell you today. Go see what He has to say." So I go wandering around with my girlfriend. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. We're chit-chatting. And I'm like, I suppose we should probably pray. And I'm like really flippant. I'll be honest. I'll be transparent. And I sat down, and God said, I'm going to heal you. And Brian's going to pray for you. And when he prays for you, this is what's going to happen. And God just laid it all out. He goes, as soon as he prays for you, your leg's going to start to feel really weird. And as he prays, it's going to get really, really intense. But by the time he's done praying for you, you're going to be able to take off your stocking, and you're going to have no more issues anymore. And I'm like, okay. And I mean, at that point, too, we were having a lot of fiscal issues. And the third part was he said our finances are going to be resolved. So I go home to tell Brian this.
But the only part you told me, we got to remember, the only part she told me was the part about that she's going to be healed. The rest of the story, she hadn't told me that yet.
Okay, I didn't have a grid on how to share this with my husband.
Yeah,
okay, because
so I
thought
didn't
he
know
thought
that
I was
part
going to be
yet.
crazy. Okay,
Yes.
Jen's like on drugs. Jen's doing
Were you
something.
debating on whether even to tell him or not?
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
because this is not like, how do you tell this story? How do you share this to somebody? And I said, all right, well, God said again that I'm going to get healed. And then he went his next day.
Before we get into my part of the story, we should tell them about the appointment where we found out about the blood clot in your leg.
Oh, hold on.
Yeah.
Can everybody hear okay, or should we turn this up? The hearing
Turn
is...
it, okay.
Gil, can you turn up their mics, because I feel like it's faint. Is it faint? Like, have the microphone up like this.
Oh, there
Okay.
we go.
We wanted...
So part of after we had our first baby, we actually had a miscarriage in between our first and our third. And the doctors told us we should never have another baby because of all my issues. They're like, you almost died. And they're like, they're like, just don't have another kid. Don't, whatever you're going to do, just don't. A lot of stress.
Mm-hmm.
But then we met with a perinatologist, which is a high-risk pregnancy doctor. And she goes, you know what? Go ahead and have another baby. She goes, you had issues, we can watch you, but actually you being on heparin saved your child's life. And I said, what do you mean? She goes, oh yeah, we did a pathology report on your sac, and there was blood clots all over in the sac. And if he wouldn't have started on heparin, he would have been a stillborn by the time he was born. So the blood clot actually saved our son's life. And they said, go ahead and have another baby.
So that was a miracle, right? Okay, that she, Nick wasn't a stillborn. And so we became thankful. And so that became a part of our story, is to say, well, Jen's got this disability, okay, but look at what that disability did.
It saved our son's life.
It saved our son's life. And so now we have this son that we wouldn't have had if she didn't have that blood clot, because he would have starved and would have been a stillborn. So we're being really thankful, and we're and we're just, and so we tell that story. And so now we'll get to my half of the story.
So Jen is at the Arboretum.
Yeah.
She senses that the Lord is saying, I'm going to heal you. I'm going to heal you through your husband Brian. he's going to lay hands and pray for you. You're going to feel a weird sensation in your leg, and you're going to take out the stocking, and you're going to be healed. You come home, you feeling like, how do I share this? You tell Brian, the Lord told me I'm going to be healed, but you don't say that Brian was going to do that, and you don't give him any details.
Well, I didn't. I mean, honestly, at that point, I had had this blood clot 8.5 years, and I had had hundreds, and I'm not kidding, hundreds of people praying for me. Everywhere I went, people were like, oh, what's wrong with your leg? Because I had this really lovely stocking on, and they'd pray for me. I mean, I traveled all over, and people prayed for me all the time. I'm like, you know what? What's one more prayer? You know, and that's kind of my attitude at this point, because I'm like, it just takes one prayer to do something. Mm-hmm. But it was hesitant because I'm like, all right, well, I've been living like this for 8.5 years. Is this really going to happen?
So then what? What were you going to say, Brian?
So then there's the other half of the story, okay? Which okay, so now I'm, and again, I had mentioned that, you know, we're grateful that we have this son, and you know, this disability is bad, but look at what we have, right? And so I'm at this Bible study for the first time at Joe Sensor's bar, of all places. We were meeting at a bar, okay? It was my first time there. And I'm sharing, you know, and we're all getting to know each other, and so they said, hey, Brian, tell us a little bit about yourself, okay? And so I started to share the story that you just heard from her standpoint of view, where, you know, gosh, you know, my wife, she's got this disability, but we're so thankful, since this is, again, taking something that's bad and turning it into good, we're so thankful that, you know, we have this son. And so then the guys look at me and said, okay, well, we're going to pray for her healing. And like Jen says, well, I was like, okay, fine, you know, all right, that's cool. You know, we're not gonna stop. Okay, you can't stop Brian at just being thankful for that. We're gonna pray for her healing. So I'm at this Bible study for the first time. We pray, and this is the part that got me. Okay, so there was a guy at the table. He says, okay, guys, are we all in agreement to this prayer? You know, I thought that was kind of weird. Well, yeah, and they said, yes, we're in agreement. Okay, all right, that's cool. And then this is what got me. The guy who was the leader of the group looked at me. He says, now, Brian, here's what you're going to do. You're going to go home. You're going to pray for your wife. You're going to lay your hands on her, and she's going to be healed. And I looked at these guys and I said, you know what, I appreciate you guys. You're all successful businesses. I didn't say this, but I said, I think this is the last time I'm coming to this Bible study. Because I was freaked out. I'm like, what? I'm going to go home, lay hands on my wife, I'm going to pray for her, and she's going to be healed. And then they said, and know that she will be healed when you do that. Well, I wasn't ready for something like that. You know, I mean, I wanted her to be healed, but I was also scared because I didn't want to be disappointed. You know, okay, I'll go. You know, so I go home, and I told her about, gee whiz, I was just at this Bible study, and man, they're great business guys, but man, they're freaking me out. And so, what does she do? What do you think she does?
I'm like, are you going to pray? When are you going to pray? Let's just pray. Let's get this over with. Come on, just pray. Let's see if I can get healed.
I said,
if it works.
Literally, I was on him.
Oh, yeah. And I said, no, I'm not ready. At first, I said no. I don't, because I was so afraid of being disappointed.
And failing.
Of course, you know, it's not my failure, but that's how I took it, you know. I mean, I you know, and so I was afraid, and so I asked God. I said, listen, you gotta show me a sign here. Forgive me for being the doubting Thomas, but I really need to know. And this was my prayer, you know. I really need to know. And so here's what now. And again, we're getting real raw here, real intimate. But he says, okay, here's what I want you to do then. You look into your wife's eyes, and I'm going to show you. This is God speaking to me, because I said I need some sort of a sign. And so I'm looking, and I'm like, what? Look into her eyes. Why look into her eyes all the time? Well, you know, there's scripture that talks about how when you look into a person's eyes, you can see into heaven, or you see, you know, their soul. And so So I'm like, all right. So we're having an intimate moment, the two of us together. We're married, and so that's what we do. We have intimate moments, and so it happened. I look into her eyes, and all of a sudden the room lights up. I'm like, whoa, what just happened here? And the only way I can explain this, yeah, I mean, the whole room just like, man, this is crazy, you know, and here's what happens. God takes what's done in the natural world and makes it supernatural. So what I'm sharing with you is a supernatural experience, that it's real, it's authentic, and there's no real easy way to say it, except that I think for a brief moment, and it was a very, very brief moment, I think God actually showed me the throne room of God. And basically, here it is. Here's the mercy seat. Yeah, that's the only way I can explain the light. The glory of the Lord. And now, but I didn't say anything to her. I'm experiencing this, okay, but I didn't say anything to her.
Yeah, he was totally silent. So, like 5-6 hours later.
Do you remember seeing his eyes?
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
that's
this is
what I was
what
gonna say. So we went to Jerry's. We got groceries.
one?
Same one.
There's something about Jerry.
Something about Jerry's.
I met somebody at Jerry's yesterday. A total stranger. I talked to him for an hour.
Yeah.
Anyway, sorry.
Anyways,
okay.
so we're driving back to our house, and I'm like, Brian, what were you thinking about when you were looking at me? Because you had the weirdest look on your face. And I said, what was that about? I saw this really, really weird look. Can you tell me about it? And he looks at me and says
I
what
told
he
her.
just
I, what
said.
So now I tell her.
And I'm like,
I said, well, I just saw
like,
the
really?
kingdom of heaven. I looked into your eyes and I saw the kingdom of heaven.
And I'm like, really? And I actually got mad. I'm like, how can you see the kingdom of heaven and I see nothing? I'm like, what? What's that all about? You know? And I'm like, so when are you going to pray?
Let me ask. So he hadn't. So this is.
Oh, he still hadn't prayed
This
yet.
is the moment between the
Okay.
man saying, "Go home
Okay.
and pray
Yes.
for your wife,"
So-
Yes.
and the actual event of him praying for you. Is that
Correct.
right?
The ar-
Correct.
Chronologically,
I had to
I wanna
process this,
Okay,
and
so
so
the-
this was me processing it.
I haven't heard
before
these parts, so
and-
So
yeah,
the
so we're giving
arbor-
the whole story.
The Arboretum was Thursday. His Bible study group was Friday. Me seeing him look at me weird was Saturday. So we're tracking here. And I'm getting more annoyed. I'm like, so when are you going to pray? You know? And he didn't pray.
and then I did. Eventually, I did.
On Wednesday the next week. And it was a process. I mean, I understand where he was coming from because he really felt like if I pray, it was his responsibility instead of God's, which
Right.
was a wrong way to be looking at it.
Yep.
Because I had people said to me, well, the reason why you haven't gotten healed is because you don't have a big enough belief in God. Do you hear the mic drop?
So you get all this theology. So
I got all this theology that was wrong. And so this is the stuff that I've been sharing with them for 8.5 years, where people said, oh, you don't believe enough, you don't have a big enough faith, you know, and they gave me a laundry list of why I didn't get healed, which is a bunch of garbage because God's the one that heals. It doesn't matter who you are, what you believe, where you're at. God can heal anybody at any time. He can even save and heal unbelievers. We physically have seen this happen. We've seen Muslim people get physically healed. And I can tell you more stories about that later. But
So two quick things.
Yeah.
One is the Lord does miracles to point back to Christ,
Yes.
glorifying Jesus. It isn't the person praying. It's not the Christian. It's
That's
Christ
right.
himself.
Absolutely.
That's number one.
Yeah.
And number two, let's be honest. You're in a predicament because number one, if nothing happens, you're deflated. You're that's an issue.
Correct.
But
Well-
number two, if you pray for her after being ill for 8.5 years and she's healed, your world is rocked.
Uh-huh.
Right? Let's be honest. Any of us here, if we pray and a miraculous event happens right before our eyes,
Yeah.
that's
Changed our life forever.
earth shattering.
Yes,
well,
it is.
and the biggest thing, too, we went to the University of Minnesota. We went to the Mayo Clinic. They said, you're screwed. You're just going to have to wear that 45-pound pressure sock and be on Coumadin the rest of your life. I mean, we had the best doctors look at me. I mean, we went after this. We spent thousands of dollars. I'm not kidding you, thousands of dollars trying to get this corrected.
I remember screaming at the doctors. At that time, we had lots of money. I didn't care how much it cost us to fix my wife's leg. I was very bold with them. I said, look, you guys can fix hearts, you can fix all these other things. Why can't you fix my wife's legs?
I mean, so
fix it.
we had no options beside God. I mean, literally, our option was God, or I was going to deal with this the rest of my life, or get healed by the time I got to heaven.
So
then what?
So then we were in our living room, and this was on the Wednesday, and we were praying for our finances because we were in a season where I had a business that was failing, and things weren't looking very good in our life, and so our prayer was about our finances. But then, okay, now while I'm praying that, he says, okay, now I want you to pray. He basically prompted me and said, okay, Brian, now is the time to pray for that healing. I said, and so I was obedient. And then.
So I'm sitting there, and my leg starts feeling weird. And he's praying, and I'm like, oh, my leg's feeling weird. And the longer he was praying, the more intense it got. It didn't hurt. It didn't feel good. It was just, I felt something in my leg. And when he was done, I looked at him. I said, Brian, it's happening. He goes, what do you mean? I go, like last Thursday when God said that my leg would start feeling weird, my leg is feeling weird right now. And he goes, well, take the stocking off.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, okay. So I took my stocking off, and I got up, and my leg was totally fine. It was totally healed. I was
swelling.
No swelling. My swelling was gone. I know that you guys can't see it today, but my leg literally was about 2 inches larger than my right leg all the time. And it went whoosh, back to normal. It was crazy. And I was actually having a garage sale that day. I was able to walk around, do the dishes, do all this stuff, squat down on my knees, no issues
For the
whatsoever.
first time in 8.5 years?
First time in 8.5 years. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. But then it gets more crazy because I'm still on Coumadin. Remember my Coumadin? Lifelong, my little range.
Blood thinners.
Blood thinners. So when you're on those blood thinners, you have to stay in that range. So I go in for my blood draw. Guess what? I'm off the charts high. Okay? The techs who I've known for 8.5 years are like, Jen, are you drinking? Are you drinking alcohol? Because you really should stop because you're really thin. I'm like, I'm not drinking alcohol. I know better. And they're like, you need to lay off drinking. I'm like, I'm not drinking. They're like, okay. So to circumvent being too high, you have to eat like green vegetables like lettuce, spinach, broccoli, that kind of stuff that I love that I couldn't eat for 8.5 years because it would throw off my Coumadin, or have green tea. They're like, go eat your spinach, go have some tea, have a good time, we'll see you in 3 days.
And they cut your Coumadin.
And they cut my Coumadin down because they're like, yeah, you're high. So I go back 3 days later, I'm eating my salads, happy as ever, drinking my green tea. They're like, Jen, really, stop drinking, you're really high. I'm like, come on, I haven't had any alcohol. And they're like, have you been drinking your tea? Have you been eating your lettuce? I'm like, yes. And I'm like, all of a sudden it clicked. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he also healed me from taking Coumadin. So I'm like, oh my gosh. I have to go tell the head of Park Nicollet's blood clot person that I got prayed over and I got healed. And by the way, this is the guy who saw me in the hospital day one when I had my 3-foot-long blood clot. Okay, so this is the same guy. So he and I have known each other for 8.5 years. He's my bud. So I make this appointment with my doctor, and I won't even tell the nurse why I needed to come in because I just could not give that reason. I'm just like, I need to see him. Just get me an appointment. So I go in, and this is 3.5 weeks later because they're like still trying to get my Coumadin. I'm still high every single time. I'm eating my lettuce. I'm drinking my green tea. I'm not drinking alcohol. He goes, what's going on, Jen? And I said, all right. And, I'm shaking. Literally, I'm shaking. Because how do you tell a doctor you got prayed over and got healed, right? Who has a grid for that? And so I'm like, all right. I said, you've known me for 8.5 years. I said, I haven't worn my stocking for 3.5 weeks, and my leg is fine. I got prayed over by my husband. I got healed. He goes, what? I said, look, I've gone 3.5 weeks. I've not worn my stocking. My leg's not swelling. I said, by the way, look at my INRs. They're off the charts. Nothing they're doing, because I kept cutting my Coumadin down to like nothing. And they can't get me in control. He goes, what do you mean? I go, I got prayed by my husband. I got healed. And I believe I should be, I believe God has healed me of taking Coumadin. He goes, you know what? I believe you. And I'm like, I'm like falling over. I'm like, oh my gosh. And he's like, but let me take a look at your chart. So he like looks through my chart for like 2-3 minutes because he wanted to look at my INRs and stuff. He goes, you know what? I'm taking you off of Coumadin. And I know you guys aren't doctors, but for somebody to be taken off Coumadin cold turkey is not something they do ever, because somebody could have another blood clot. He's like, I'm taking you off the Coumadin now. You're done. And I'm like, yes. But then he goes, but I want you to come back in 30 days. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, in 30 days, I want you to come in because the Coumadin's going to be out of the system, and I want to see what your blood markers are. I'm like, all right, fine, no problem. So I go the next 30 days. I am having no issues. My leg's awesome. I'm off of the Coumadin. I'm having a good time, loving life, praising God, still kind of like trying to like wrap my head around this. I go back in, and they do a blood draw. When you have blood clots, there's markers in your blood showing that you've had blood clots. I had none. Everything was at normal or below normal for showing any blood clots 30 days later. Praise God.
So as we conclude
Yes.
this powerful testimony, what does that do in your marriage? What is God doing in your faith and your walk with Christ? Because as we are talking about marriage and wedding plans and those kinds of things, we were talking about how as a husband follows and pursues and growing in Jesus and getting close to Jesus, and the wife is also it's not a foot race, so it's not an exact timing thing, but as the husband grows closer to Jesus, as the wife grows closer to Jesus, that's happening for you and has happened for you. And so what would you say about that?
That actually was a blessing, but it was very traumatic because, yes, he was the one that prayed for me, but now he thought I was a superstar Christian because God loved me because I got healed. And I'm like, not really. I'll be transparent. I really hadn't read my Bible from cover to cover ever at that point. And I'm like, what does the Bible really say about this? So I actually had to go to a ministry down in Burnsville called Dare to Believe to help me unpack this. So I went through 3 years of ministry school. And Brian was really challenged that I was going through ministry school, and he felt that I was excelling and doing all the stuff, and I was a superstar, rock star Christian. When I'm just trying going, oh, God, just help me understand, help me process this. How do I talk about this? Because when this did happen, I had probably 50% of my friends went away. And I'm not kidding you. I had 50% of my friends could not comprehend and process that I got physically healed, and they walked away because they couldn't deal with that reality, whether they were Christian or not. So it was stressful. And then he had friends that didn't have a grid for it, that I got prayed over and healed. So we had a lot of stress going on during that process. But we were growing together.
Yep.
We were praying together, and we were just trying to navigate, this new reality that I got healed, having people drop us cold and just turn their backs, and these people still don't talk to me today.
Just to clarify what that, the 50%, basically, it gets down to religion or doctrine, if you want to call it that. There are some of our friends basically believe that miracles were for the time of the Bible, and that it ended there. And I don't know what the intellectual words are for that. Maybe you can help with that. But
cessationist.
Is that what the word is? And they just couldn't. It messed them up, and they didn't want to be messed with.
So in other words, Christians can disappoint other Christians. You
Yes, they can.
Yes.
Yeah, we were very disappointed because we wanted them to be excited. And they ended up
And
saying...
again, the point of the miracles that happen in people's lives is to show that Christ is alive. Hallelujah,
Absolutely.
and to encourage and strengthen us in our faith, those two things.
Correct. Yep.
I want to thank you for joining us, and you'll stay for a couple minutes.
Sure, of
If
Absolutely.
you want to pray or ask questions and talk to
Yeah.
you. We're going to just close. I'm going to play an upbeat. Somebody said, "Will you play an upbeat Christian song for the end of our service today?" So
But,
we're going
can I just
do
share
that.
something though?
Yeah.
Just so it's not on a downer note.
Yeah.
But I will,
Yeah. Oh, that's a good
I
point.
will say this. You know, the friends that we have made since I've gotten healed, we have worldwide friends now. I have such deep Christian sisters that I love dearly that have walked us through with us on this process, and these have become really dear, dear, dear friends to us.
Yeah.
And they've been our supporters, and honestly, these are our tribe. This is our tribe. So God has turned that around and really has given us some great Christian friends that really are authentic, transparent, and can love us with our testimony and encourage us on. So there are people like that out there, and God has put those people in our lives.
Yes. Go to the next one. Here's